Bristol likes to sell itself as a city of bridges, a place of culture, resilience, progress, but bridges don't mean a damn thing when kids are left to die in the gaps between the very services meant to protect them. Darrian Williams, 16 years old, murdered in Easton, Max Dixon, 15, and Mason Rist, 16, hacked down in Knoll West. These weren't nameless faces in a crime stat, they were children. And the most painful truth? They were all known to the systems. Schools, police, social care, safeguarding boards, all had a file, all had a glimpse, all had warning signs. And still, all of them failed. It's not tragedy in the passive sense, it's negligence wearing a suit. Let's start with Darrian, bright boy, ambitious, wanted to be a lawyer, loved and cared for by his family. He wasn't in a gang, he wasn't a weapon carrier, but he was marked by the system the moment he was excluded from mainstream education. And here's the raw truth. In Bristol, exclusion is a conveyor belt. One moment you're in school, the next you're pushed into an alternative provision, a polite term for dumping ground. And once you're dumped, attendance drops, monitoring disappears, and services sigh in relief. Not our responsibility anymore. Schools wash their hands, social care shrugs, police clock the postcode and keep it moving. That conveyor belt doesn't lead to reform, it leads to funerals. The independent review didn't even bother hiding it. Every child involved, Darrian, his killers, even the wider circle of kids orbiting the violence, was known to multiple services. Known. But known doesn't mean safe. In Britain, known to services has become a curse. It means your name is somewhere in a database, your story reduced to bullet points in a meeting no one attends, a child flagged on paper but invisible in reality. It means social workers are underfunded, police are understaffed, schools are overwhelmed, and the gaps between them swallow lives. Darrian's family said it plain, my brother and his killers were all failed by the authorities. That's the most damning line in this whole saga, because the killers too were children. They were known to services, at risk sliding into dangerous circles, and still nothing. The city watched a pressure cooker boil and then acted surprised when it exploded. This isn't just a failure to save Darrian. It's a failure to stop 2 more kids from becoming killers at 15 and 16, lives destroyed on all sides, and every single one of them touched the system before the blood spilled. And the report has the audacity to call the city's safeguarding approach fractured and overly complicated. That's soft language. That's academic cowardice. Let's translate. Fractured means nobody knew what the hell the other hand was doing. Overly complicated means services were too busy playing bureaucracy bingo to pick up a phone. They've dressed up lethal negligence in polite words. Kids are dead, and the report reads like a group project PowerPoint. Look at schools. Schools are the first line of defense. They see the absences, the fights, the slipping grades. They see who's being groomed, who's being isolated. And instead of ringing alarm bells, what did they do? They pressed the eject button. Exclusion after exclusion, letting kids fall into alternative provisions where education is basically babysitting until they turn 16 and vanish. When a child is excluded, that is a red flare in the sky. It should mean immediate intervention, wraparound support, serious adult presence. But in Bristol, exclusion is treated as housekeeping. Tidy the classroom by shoving the problem elsewhere. And where's elsewhere? The street, the park, the gangs, the graveyard. Now social care. Bristol's children's services have been branded requires improvement for years. That's Ofsted code for kids at risk, but no political will to fix it. Caseloads in the hundreds. Burned out workers drowning in paperwork. Families begging for support and being told you don't meet the threshold. What does threshold mean? It means come back when your child is already in the criminal justice system or in a coffin. Social care was aware of these children. They had files, referrals, meetings. But no one brought it together. No one owned the risk. They let kids slip into silence until silence turned into screams. And the police. Don't get me started on the police. Avon and Somerset knew about tensions in these areas. They knew which kids were being groomed, who was hanging around with who. They knew Easton, Knoll West, St Paul's, Lawrence Hill have long been hotspots for youth violence. But the police approach is always reactive. Kick down doors after the fact. Flood estates with flashing lights once the blood is on the tarmac. They'll say resourcing is tight. Of course it is, but somehow there are always enough boots for a drugs raid, always enough tasers for a teenager with a vape, never enough presents when schools and social care are screaming about a kid sliding into danger. And while all these institutions were playing hot potato with responsibility, 3 boys ended up dead. Darrian stabbed in Easton, Max and Mason hacked down in Knoll West, caught in a mistaken identity killing so brutal it could have been scripted by Shakespeare if Shakespeare had access to machetes and samurai swords. Innocent kids, wrong place, wrong time, slaughtered because systems were asleep at the wheel. What's Bristol's response? PR, strategies, buzzwords, the harm outside the home strategy, a multi-agency team. Improved data sharing. They love data sharing. They'll share spreadsheets until the cows come home, but God forbid they actually share responsibility. The council has promised charity involvement and locality-based safeguarding. Translation: more meetings, more acronyms, more paperwork. Meanwhile, parents are burying their children. And here's where satire bites. Imagine if the NHS worked like this. You go to A&E with chest pain. They tell you, we'll put your name on a list, but cardiology isn't sharing data with neurology, so we'll have to wait until the quarterly safeguarding review. Try not to die in the meantime. That's how Bristol runs child safety. Death by admin, protection by PowerPoint, children reduced to case numbers passed around like a bad email chain. The family voices cut through the nonsense. Tiffany Williams, Darrian's foster carer, said, "We know that all the children involved were known to multiple organisations, but no one is coming together to discuss the concerns, and that's it. The city let silos kill, they let not my department kill, they let requires improvement kill, and now families are left with holes where boys should be." And what about accountability? Who loses their job? Who steps down? Who says, "This blood is on my hands"? No one. Because in Britain, systemic failure is a tragedy without culprits. Services will promise lessons learned, and then the same cycle repeats until the next dead child teaches them the same lesson again. The same words, the same reports, the same failures, and the same silence once the news cycle moves on. But here's the reality. Darrian's death, Max's death, Mason's death were not inevitable. They were preventable. They were flashing red warnings ignored by adults with clipboards. Exclusion should have triggered intervention. Absences should have triggered outreach. Social care should have coordinated with schools, should have pulled in police, should have wrapped these boys in the protection of adults who cared. Instead, everyone waited for someone else to act. And when everyone waits, no one moves. We can't fix what's broken until we call it by its name. The boys weren't failed by fate. They were failed by systems, failed by institutions too busy protecting themselves to protect children, failed by adults who mistook data points for lives, and now Bristol, my city, has to look in the mirror and admit that it didn't just lose 3 boys, it lost its claim to being a city that protects its young. So here's the demand. Stop using words like fractured and complex. Say the truth, we killed them by neglect. Stop hiding behind strategies and acronyms. Fund social care like lives depend on it, because they do. Train schools to treat exclusion as an emergency, not housekeeping. Put police on prevention instead of just raids. And for once in your bureaucratic lives, talk to each other before a parent has to identify their child's body in a morgue. Darrian should be alive. Max should be alive. Mason should be alive. They weren't statistics, they weren't gang members, they weren't lost causes. They were boys with futures stolen by knives, yes, but also by systems that saw the danger coming and chose to look away. If Bristol wants to keep calling itself a city of bridges, it had better start building some between the services meant to protect children. Otherwise, the next boy already has a name, already has a file, and already has a funeral waiting. This is not left, this is not right, this is real, and the real truth is this. Bristol didn't just fail these boys, it betrayed them. Our hearts go out to the families of these murdered boys. They were sons, brothers, cousins, lives stitched into families that will never be the same. Knife crime isn't cool, it isn't brave, it isn't culture. It's the culmination of a generation so terrified of standing tall, of throwing fists and walking home bruised but alive, that they turn a blade into judge, jury, and executioner. And now the city is infested with alien rats clawing for male validation through death. F the knife, fam. Put them paws up and dance. Fight like our grandfathers fought. Bare knuckle, pride intact, everyone still breathing by the end of the night. You might get rocked, you might get dropped, but you all made it home. That was the code. That was survival. Rest in power. We are not religious people. In fact, we are all atheists. Yet if a divine does exist, we hope she can bless us with her divine light. Because until we see the stranger as brother and sister, until we choose humanity over opposition, our youth will continue to cannibalize themselves in alleyways and parks. Once again, rest in power. May their names live forever in the minds of all Bristolians, carried in memory until the very day our species goes extinct.
To find what lessons could be learned from the flurry of knife crime incidents at the start of last year that saw 3 teenagers murdered in Bristol. The victims' families say they were failed by the system and by the city.
The education department needs to look at this review thoroughly and understand the stage that we're at now, and understand how education is, I think, is one of the keys to reducing knife crime. I believe the key is in the school doors. If they're in school 6 hours a day, as most kids should be, then I believe that a lot of things in early intervention would be possible. And yeah, as I say, I think exclusions needs to come to an immediate stop.
The report makes a 7-point action plan of recommendations around reducing exclusions from school, boosting attendance, improving support for children with special needs, and creating a consistent multi-agency response across the city.
We all need to be working together, and that means that if the police aren't doing it right, then start talking to the police about, get those messages into the police so that they can change that practice. If the council's not doing it right, then we come out and tell us what that is. We're listening to you, and we want to do the best within whatever resource there is, so that our young people and our children can live the best life that they're able to.